Hello, welcome back to All on This Together, a podcast that combines love of public transport and storytelling. I'm Emily Turner. I'm a prolific public transport rider and public transport fan, and I'm going to be joined by an exciting guest today. I'm so excited because this guest has been on my favorite quiz show, probably the only TV show I really watch regularly, so very, very excited about that. Today, I am wearing my Pro Trans, Pro Trains t-shirt for anyone who isn't watching. Probably one of my favorite of the public transport clothing items I own. And I'm going to jump right in. I've got buses, very exciting. I've got buses for guess what public transport this is today. So welcome to All on This Together. That's a UK one, so hopefully that one's a bit easier. Even I could identify that one. I am so excited to be joined by this guest. It was someone who I immediately, when I thought of this podcast, said, yes, I need to talk to her. She's amazing and so interesting, and we'll definitely have some good stories. So, like magic, she's going to appear. Hello, Anne. Welcome to the podcast with your amazing map behind you and incredible pink microphone, which matches my color scheme on the podcast. So I'm pleased with that. I'm actually going to change that so you can see us a bit better. Introduce yourself. Tell our listeners / watchers about you.
Hi, my name is Anne. I am a transport enthusiast / anorak. / transport nerd. I work in the transport industry, but before I started working in the transport industry, I was the type of person who would spend my weekends wandering around London, photographing stations and visiting stations because I love transport so much.
That's exactly what this podcast is about. It's about loving transport. So I'm really pleased to have you here. You describing yourself as an anorak just reminded me, I found someone on Vinted the other day selling London Underground books and anoraks. Those were the two things they were actually selling. And I was like, this is amazing. Sorry, that's totally unrelated. This is about you and your transport stories. So we were just talking before you came on about how you are from America. So both of us are Londoners, by the way. If you're new to this, we don't sound like it, but we're both Londoners. But that your experience growing up was always traveling on transport, which is interesting to me as a Canadian who basically drove everywhere for my whole childhood.
Yeah, so I grew up in the Philadelphia suburbs, and when I was 16, I got my driver's license, and then my parents were like, well, we'd like you to have a little more experience with us in the car before you actually go out on your own. And when you're 16, the last thing you want to do is spend time with your parents in the car.
Mhm.
So I just never did. And then my driver's license lapsed, and I went to college and just never used it. I went to college in the suburb or uni in the suburbs of Philadelphia and took public transport into Philadelphia to go to punk rock shows. So I took the train all the time for my social life. And then I graduated college, moved out of the United States to Taiwan, where I took the bus, and then I took the new Taipei Metro, then came back to the United States and realized that my life was going to center around cities in the United States that had good metro systems. So my life in the United States basically revolved around New York, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C., because they had metro systems where I could live my life without having to use a car or get a car. And it was really, you can do it in the United States. You don't need a car to live in the United States. You don't need to know how to drive. You don't need to have it helps to have friends sometimes for IKEA
Yeah.
trips, but other than that, it's totally doable um to live in the United States without a car. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize, and it's so easy to be car dependent so quickly as soon as you have one, and I think just pushing yourself there. I found when I was last in Canada, I grew up in the suburbs of Edmonton, which is a lot smaller than Philadelphia, but yeah, I was like, I'm gonna take the bus and I'm gonna take the light transit. And I'm like, oh, actually, this is manageable. I could have done this. But yeah, if you don't ever get the impetus to do it, it doesn't necessarily happen. Um, so you also have done a lot of long distance traveling by public transport.
Um yes, I have. So one of my passions is Eurovision. So by the way, I'm autistic. An autistic person who loves transport. Unlike the stereotype of autistic people who love transport, I don't necessarily love um trains as in I don't know everything about, like, oh, it's this make, it's this model. I'm
Mhm.
more of a stations person. So I
Mhm.
love being in a station and looking at station architecture. But uh, I love Eurovision. So that's one of my passions. And because I love Eurovision, I love traveling to Eurovision countries
Mhm.
and seeing like shows that happen on a weekend. So I'll go see Eurovision national finals. Now, going to them usually involves getting up at like 4 a.m. to catch a Ryanair flight out of Stansted at 6 a.m. And it's a miserable experience.
Mhm.
So over the past couple of years, I was inspired by another Your fan named Elaine, who is absolutely wonderful.
Who I've
And
also lined up to come on this podcast, so
oh, excellent!
if it's the
Yes,
same Elaine, I assume it is, but yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's going to be the same Elaine. Um, but I was like, why am I not taking the train to some of these places? So I've started taking the train to Eurovision locations or Eurovision related things. So this year I went to the national finals in Lithuania, in a tiny town called Klaipėda on
Mhm.
the coast of Lithuania, and did it all in an overland journey from London to Lithuania. And it was so much more fun than, hopping on a plane and going to Lithuania. I did that on the way back because I was tired. And,
Mhm.
it's, but going there, I got to just see so much more and experience so much more. And yeah, it was just a lot of fun.
Where does that journey take you through?
So it was London to Paris, and I did overnight in Paris. You can do it starting early morning in London, but again, um I didn't want to wake up super early and worry about missing anything. Um then Paris to Munich. No, Paris to Stuttgart,
Yeah.
Stuttgart to Munich, Munich to Warsaw on the night train,
Mhm.
which is an experience in and of itself. I accidentally locked myself in my cabin. I don't know how I did it. This is also one of the joyful things. You're gonna have these experiences, and I had to kind of pound on the door, and the conductors are always grumpy middle-aged men who speak like this. It reminds me that I never feel more American than I do on a night train, because I feel like my halting German or my halting Italian or my halting Croatian is just not enough to communicate with these grumpy middle-aged male conductors
Yeah.
who are just like, "What are you doing? Why are you wasting my time?" There's like disdain dripping. So I managed to lock myself in my cabin, and this guy was just like, how did you do this? Like, what are you, how did you manage? How could you be such an idiot? And he's like, don't lock this door, lock this door. I still have no idea how he did it, but he managed to let me out. And we got to Warsaw. I spent a day in Warsaw and then spent the day from after my day in Warsaw, the next morning I caught the train to Vilnius and then traveled from Vilnius to Klaipėda, where I then spent a lovely 2 days. Yeah, that was a long way of describing it. Yes.
No, no, I love that too. I love you're right about those conductor people. I remember the first time I ever took a train in Europe, I had an Interrail pass and I was like, yeah, some 21-year-old Canadian. And I got in this carriage that I thought I was allowed to go in on a sleeper train. And he was like, no, this is second class. You're supposed to be in third class. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. He's like, you haven't even activated your pass. I'm like, I'm so sorry. This was in Prague. And he was like, I will let you stay on the condition that you talk to me all night, which sounded creepy, but he wanted to practice his English. So he was like, I'll let you stay as long as you practice English with me. But he spent the whole time ranting about how he preferred to speak in German, and German was a much more homogenous language, and he didn't like English. And I was like, I'm sorry, I'll learn German. And I did learn German, but not because of him, because I lived in Austria. But also I was like, you know, it was exactly that experience though. He was like, maybe I'll deal with this. And then finally he was like, okay, you can stay in this place you're not supposed to be in, but only if you speak in English with me all night. It's like, okay, fine. Good adventures. Yeah. I've never taken a train. I've never been to Lithuania. What are trains like there?
The Lithuanian train system was actually amazing because they are they're very worried about sustainability and being carbon neutral, so you could do it all online. I bought my tickets online. It's all on an app, so it was super easy to do in Lithuania. Um
Mm.
and the stations were really nice. Um, so I found that part completely easy to do. It was easy to navigate, and I thought it was fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, I really want to go to Estonia, but I keep meeting Lithuanian people who are really nice. So I'm like, let's just get up to Lithuania and Latvia as well.
Yeah, I think you could do the Baltic trip. I've
Yeah.
I've actually been meaning to do that and then take the ferry to Finland
Oh, nice.
because that's also worth it. I've done the ferry from Finland to Estonia in the middle of February when it's literally breaking the ice,
Oh, very
because
nice.
there's so much ice. Yeah, Estonia is one of my favorite places. Tallinn is one of my favorite places to be. I've been there 3 or 4 times, and it's just super friendly, super chill. Um, and they've got a great tram from the airport, and public transport is free for
Mm.
residents, but like I've never managed to figure out how to pay, and nobody seems to care. Um yeah, it's one of those situations where you're kind of like, wait, what am I doing? Yeah.
Yeah,
The other reason, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
no, go ahead, go ahead. Tell
Yeah.
me more about Estonia.
Well, I was about to say the other reason that I really love to travel by train versus Ryanair or EasyJet when I'm going for Eurovision things is because I'm going for Eurovision things and I usually have like a lot of sequins in my bag. And when you have a luggage issue, like trying to cram that into a Ryanair carry-on case,
Mm.
it it doesn't work. So trains give you more. You can fit a lot more into the luggage allotment on a train, and nobody really cares. Yeah.
Yeah, if you bring too much, you can just use a suitcase as a pillow, which I've done before in my days of youth and traveling with way too much stuff.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I know it's a hot topic on the internet. Comparisons between American and European, the European mind can't comprehend kind of statement. What would you say? I mean, I know there's obvious things, but are there more subtle things that you say are kind of differences of your experience of having done a lot of both?
I will say that every time I go back and I ride Amtrak, I'm shocked at how roomy it is. Like the leg room on it is amazing. I can put my case with my seat I don't have to put it overhead, and I still have room to sit comfortably.
Mhm.
Um, Unlike many trains in Europe or in the UK where like it's really that much leg room, and it's uncomfortable. And I'm a short person, and it's still really uncomfortable. So yeah, but again, yeah, Amtrak is fun, but it's just not as well connected.
Yeah.
Um, I tried a couple years ago, again because I don't drive and I this has somehow warped my sense of geography. I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna be in New York. There's this Star Trek exhibit I want to see. It's in upstate New York. Why don't I take Amtrak to go there?" So it was in Saratoga Springs, New York, where they have a replica. Some guy built a replica model of the original Star Trek series sets. Um,
Okay.
so I took a 3-hour Amtrak ride from New York to Saratoga Springs, New York, and I got out of the train at Saratoga Springs. The train station, it was the middle of October, but it was still kind of warm. There was no cell service. It was because it was Amtrak, and Amtrak has was decimated, and a lot of its routes were moved out of town when American cities were kind of um decimated, and American rail routes were decimated in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. Um, the actual rail station had been moved out of town. So it's kind of a shack in the middle of nowhere. And I got off the train and it was just me and my partner, and that's it. And we're standing there next to this shack, and the train pulls away and there is no cell service. And I was like, what did I get into? Um, and I really thought we were going to have to walk like 2 miles into town, but then a taxi came along because they knew the train service times. But it was yeah. So sometimes, again, the connectivity isn't as good versus Europe, where you just kind of pull into the center of the city and boom, you're there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's I've been on the Canadian across Canada where they just drop people off literally at the side of the track. There's no station, there's no anything. It's like just get there sometimes is a station, but it's been turned into a bank or something like that. And it's just you just drive on the side of the track. But yeah, I mean, I remember when was doing my master's, I had a friend who was from somewhere near Poughkeepsie, I think he was from, and everyone was like, "Oh, he's moving back in with his parents." And he's like, "Oh, I'll be so isolated." And then they'll be like, "Oh, could you take the train into New York City?" And it was like, "Yeah, not really. It's a long, slow journey," which is yeah, I think it's one of those things too that people in the UK, I think there is a lot to complain about transport services in the UK, but I'm also like, yeah, they do exist. They're not good enough, but they do exist and they do have something. But yeah, I remember the first time I came to the UK being on a train and being like, this is so amazing. And the guy across from me was like, what are you talking about? Like this is a Virgin West Coast service that breaks down all the time. And I was like, I don't care. I've gone from Glasgow to London in like a few hours.
Exactly. Like the fact that you could get from like coast to coast in 5 or 6 hours. I'm like, what? This is great. It blows my mind. And then looking at the public transport systems that exist in the UK, Glasgow having the Clockwork Orange,
Mm-hmm.
um, Wolverhampton having a tram system that takes you to Birmingham.
Yeah.
Like, wow, there's these little pockets of connectivity where you're just like, this is great. Um, and it just makes it easy. Like, I would growing up, I would have killed to have had tram systems
Mm.
that just made it easy to get around from city to city.
Mhm.
in such an easy way. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the space between things is greater, but yeah, that sort of suburban, like, it's so many steps to get anywhere is so frustrating. And obviously that is the case for a lot of people living in the UK as well, but I think it's funny because at one point I'm like, yeah, things are great. There's all sorts of good transport. And then at the other point, I like live on the Victoria line and I'm like, there's a 3-minute gap. What is this? I'm you get spoiled so quickly from not having any transport at all.
I I was back, in Washington, DC, where I used to live, and I was catching the train late at night and there was a 20-minute gap and I was like, "What is this? This doesn't even count as metro service, which is one train per 15 minutes. How can they call themselves a metro?" And this was a couple years back when they were having some real problems,
Yeah.
with trains catching on fire. Like they have turned around the service, but I was and that again reminded me like the metro in Washington DC is one of the better public transport providers in the United States. So to have a service like that in our nation's capital and have that be considered kind of acceptable or one of the better examples of public
Mm,
transport. And then you understand why Americans use cars because if you have to wait 20 minutes for a train and factor that into your journey, well, of course you're not going to take a train because that's an extra 20 minutes you could be doing something else.
yeah, and it takes one small inconvenience making you late, and suddenly you're not traveling, which is the same as the rest of the UK. If your train service is only half hourly, you're not going to do that unless it's kind of specifically for a day going into town or if you repeatedly take that commute. But any kind of odd journey that's not what you sort of normally do, it's just not convenient. And yeah, I mean, I always think of as a child, public transport was so exciting to me because the only time I was taking it was like to go to a hockey game, to go to a festival, to go to some. I know it's very specific and it's very sensitive right now because the Oilers just lost the Stanley Cup in Game 7. But it was very like it's a big event. It was a big exciting thing where there wouldn't be parking to take public transport, and I think that's so different to my everyday life in London and a lot of people's everyday lives in cities around the world. But if you don't get that frequency, it's just not going to be something you do regularly.
When I get into a car now, it feels really strange to me. And, you know, the things where you talk about there not being parking, like if I go to an event back in the United States with my family and we have to wait to get out of a parking lot, I'm kind of like, what's going on? What is this? Because I'm so used to, maybe waiting in a queue to get on a train, but it's definitely not. Yeah, it just seems weird to be sitting in a car just waiting to move.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
moving so slowly and repeatedly, and you're like,
yeah,
just get out of here. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Especially because on public transport, I feel like I know the tricks. Like you ride one way and then hop on and then get a seat going the other way. So like there are things you could do to at least have the illusion of movement. But if you're in a car, you're just kind of stuck in traffic. Yeah, so it is really really frustrating.
yeah,
Um, yeah.
yeah. It's so interesting to me because I didn't think I'd ever live without a car, and now I don't imagine a future for myself in which I own a car again, even if I had children, even if, all sorts of other things. I can't imagine having a car because it just doesn't I just I look at the road outside my house, which is just gridlock every day at the end of the day, and I'm just like, why would I can walk up to the tube station faster than I can even catch a bus, and it's like a 12-minute walk because there's so much traffic, and I'm like, "Yeah, what just sitting there, it's so boring. Just wanna move."
Yeah, and my friends in the United States would tease me for not having a car or not driving. They'd be like, "But, like, what if one of us had a heart attack and you needed to get us to the hospital?" I'd be like, "I'd call an ambulance." Like, any situation you could come up with, like, I could come up with the counterfactual to match it. Like, there is no reason I should be behind the wheel of a car, and quite frankly, as somebody who is autistic and gets easily distracted by shiny things,
Yeah.
you don't want me behind the wheel of a car. Like, yeah, it's, a
Yeah.
like,
Driving in
sitting down.
London is
Yeah,
terrifying to me. I've only done it a couple of times, and I've been like, "Oh my god, how does anyone do this regularly?" And I'm also autistic, dyspraxic as well. Driving, I'm okay with on, like, a highway, great. Depth perception, I'm terrible at, which is all driving in London. It's like inching a few
yeah.
inches forward, and then you're going like, "Oh, there's a cyclist right here, and there's this." Oh, I don't know how anyone does it. It just and I am someone who genuinely loved driving when I was younger, and I'm like, "Nope, have no desire to do." I don't understand roundabouts, they stress me out. I've rented cars here, didn't know that the lights didn't turn on automatically like they do at home. That stressed me out. So, yeah, no, I'm very happy with public transport.
And I think, like, what I wanna do is I understand that there are people for whom the public transport experience is equally stressful, like getting in a
Mhm.
car full of like, a carriage full of strangers, having bright lights, having noise they can't control.
Yeah.
I understand that's completely stressful, and what I kind of wanna do with public transport is demystify that and let people know what the experience they're gonna have
Mhm.
is, so that it is less stressful and they understand what they're getting into.
Yeah.
Um, because and then hopefully help people make the modal shift,
Yeah.
um, from one thing to another, because I feel like that public transport is has definitely been the right choice for me, and I try to do it because I like traveling by public transport. I like the way it makes me feel. I like the experiences I have.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, I just want to kind of talk it up to everybody and answer questions they might have and be like, no, no, it really it can be worth it.
I
Yeah.
mean, I'm very fond of yelling on the internet about like, there's an easy way to book this ticket. This is because I think there is, I mean, particularly in the UK, you were talking about how good it was in Lithuania and how easy it was to book things, but it's so convoluted. And then it's like getting a rail card will get it cheaper for this journey, but you need this rail card won't work for this. And then there's like 15 different companies. It's so frustrating. We could get into all the politics behind it and stuff like that. But I think that's for other podcasts. But also, like, it's just, I get it because as someone who's probably in the very top percentage of public transport literacy, I get confused by things all the time. I mean, I was planning a journey from Litchfield to Wolverhampton for a campaigning thing I was doing last week by bus. And I got to Walsall bus station, and the bus driver was like, "Oh, don't take this bus, take a different bus." And I was like, this is literally what I do. I plan bus journeys, and I didn't know that there was a better bus here. And it's just so difficult to figure that out. And that's such a hurdle to begin with when you can't understand the train booking system and you can't understand the timetabling system and you can't understand. I mean, I know there's historical reasons, obviously, for things like King's Cross and St. Pancras being right next to one another. But I was trying to explain to someone who was traveling at the same place as me, but was coming from Turkey the other day of how to get to Letchworth, north of London. And it was like, okay, you can go from St. Pancras or you can go from King's Cross. They're both the same tube station, but they're two different train stations. And I was like, I might as well just explain one of them to you. And then she was traveling with someone else and she was like, well, what about this journey? And I was like, I can't explain the so many different intricacies. And I think it's easy once you learn it. But I saw a TikTok today of someone who was saying they'd visiting from the States. They saved money by staying in Hackney, but it took them so long to understand how to get from Hackney to central London that it wasn't really worth it. And I was like, it's so easy, but I recognize that's not what people are used to, and it's hard to understand if you're not used to seeing things in that way.
And I think that this is one of the things which makes it hard to convince people to travel by train because, if you're on a flight, you start from point A, you land in point B, and you're there. But if you are going from place to place, I've done Lithuania, I've done Croatia, I've done Turin, um, I've done across Sweden to Copenhagen. There are multiple points of failure,
Mhm.
and if you don't speak the language, um, language apps help, but if you don't speak the language, if trains are late, there are points when you might think, "Okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to deal with this?" So it can
Mhm.
be really daunting, but
Yeah.
it's easier than you expect, and I have had things go wrong on every single journey. I've gotten off at the wrong stop, trains have been late,
Mhm.
and, people have always helped me,
Yeah.
um and when I say people, I mean there have always been station staff around to help. I've always found something on my phone that will help me. So I really hope people have the confidence to
Yeah.
try and do these things. Um, because you can do it. It's just taking a train and it's literally just sitting there and enjoying the scenery from the beautiful train window. Yeah.
I think it's always nice to have those experiences where things do go wrong and you figure it out, and for people to remember that, because 'cause I've had situations where I've been like, "I am totally screwed. I am stranded here. There is nothing I can do." And I've been like, "No, wait. There was that time in Serbia when the air conditioning was broken and no one could tell me that, and eventually one person came and got me and took me to the train where the air conditioning wasn't broken, and I sat beside across from a diplomat who had studied playwriting at Harvard and had a long conversation about theater history with me, and then showed me a hostel in Croatia when I wasn't even meant to be going to Croatia, and I was like, that was an amazing experience that I'm so glad I had. But if I had just been like, I can't deal with this situation. And I get it. It is scary to feel like you're stranded somewhere. But, you know, if you can, and I think the privilege of being a white Canadian, being like, I don't know what's going on, someone does help you. And I think not everyone has that. But I do think there is, yeah, there is a lot of within people the ability to solve problems that come across. And actually, I always feel quite proud of myself when I'm like, I've solved that. We got out of here. We're still alive.
Yeah, I do think the point about privilege is a good one because I am a white American woman who can come off as very non-threatening until I meet a grumpy middle-aged train conductor on a night train, and then I will get very argumentative very fast in a variety of languages I don't speak.
Mhm.
I was on the night train to Croatia, and I was trying to figure out when breakfast was being served. Like, so I went to ask somebody. Like, I went to look. I was like, maybe there's a breakfast carriage or something, and I got into like a fight with one of the conductors because I was like, breakfast, and he didn't speak English, and I didn't speak Croatian, and we tried German, we tried Italian, we tried like 3 or 4 different languages. Yeah, it was a mess. And I eventually and he was just like, I wow, that was a traumatic experience. But then the other conductor gave us extra fruit, because he was like, "Oh, hey, here's some extra fruit. Have some enjoy your trip. Have some extra fruit." So people will always you're always gonna have, good and bad, and the good always outweighs the bad. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think those are the things I remember. Like, I did the Trans-Siberian Railway years ago in a different political climate. It wasn't that many years ago. It was 2019, but it was a different
Yeah.
world in 2019. And it was so funny because there were 2 conductors that go the whole way, the whole 6 days from, well, went to Beijing, technically the Trans-Manchurian, and there was one woman who was lovely, didn't speak any English, and a man who, as soon as we left, like, Moscow, as soon as we were out of the, like, populated areas, took his shirt off and never put it back on. Like, he was doing his whole job shirtless. I mean, it was hot on that train, but he spoke hardly any English, And I was always like, this shirtless man is a bit intimidating, but he was so friendly always. And he'd always be like, we're in this town, 4 hours in this town, 4 hours, go get vodka. And I'm like, I'm not going to go get vodka in a random town on the Russian Chinese border, but I'm glad you're telling me what I need to do. And I think people do want to help people and are excited, particularly if people are coming to places that they're not usually used to tourists traveling in. I think people are a lot more hostile to tourists in London than a small town when they're like, oh, wow, it's cool that you're coming here, as long as, being respectful and things like that.
Yeah, people are happy that you've made the effort, and like I've had some fantastic experiences like telling people, "Hey, I've come all the way from London to see you perform," or "I've come all the way from London to see you because this is amazing." And people are like, "Wow, it's great." And yeah, um it's just, and it's a nice it's just nice. It's
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think it's really enriched me personally going out and seeing the world, because I spent the first 21 years of my life in Philadelphia, in the Philadelphia area, and then it wasn't until I moved. I literally said, I love Philadelphia and I will probably stay in Philadelphia for the rest of my life if I do not leave. And I got up and I moved halfway around the world, and it was kind of the best thing I ever did because it just broadened my horizons. And um yeah, now whenever I get the chance, I'm just trying to see as many different places, and train travel is, I think, a good way to do it because it's slow enough to kind of give you a perspective that you don't get on a plane where
Yeah.
everybody's just kind of hoping to get off the plane as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and I love the feeling of actually feeling like you experience the time, so to speak. I always find it very jarring to get on a plane and then be in Canada. And it's like, what? I was on a different continent like 10 hours ago. This doesn't make any sense. And I think to actually feel the amount that you're moving and how sort of things change and the landscape change and how remarkable it is and the different people and the different borders, it feels really nice, I think, which you don't get that kind of just antsily sitting on a plane.
Yeah, I think especially in Europe where the borders like change more frequently, so you feel like you're making progress.
Yeah.
So in a place like Canada or the United States, it is kind of more like, okay, I'm still in the United States. Yeah,
Yes, I mean, that is did what I felt a bit about the Trans-Siberian. I was like, "Oh, and it's another day of the Russian plains," and I am yeah, that was more pot noodles than anyone should ever eat in a week in their life. I was like, "No, I can't do it again." They weren't even cooked properly because the water wasn't hot enough, so I was like anyway, let's not go there. Um, is there anything else you'd like to sort of talk about in terms of transport or advocate for or anything like that?
no, I mean, I love trains. I love the experience of riding trains. I love train stations, and I love
Mhm,
train station architecture. And
mhm,
I think that one of the joys of going to different countries is looking at train station architecture, because
mhm,
I think it says a lot about what people care about. It tells you a lot about a place's history. Um, and it can be really revealing.
mhm.
And a lot of them are just absolutely gorgeous spaces to be in.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think train stations are some of my favorite places to be in the world. They just feel comfortable, um, comfortable places to be in. Yeah.
I love North American train stations that always also make me feel so sad because I'm like, "Oh, this is beautiful, and one train a week passes through here." But yes, I do they are great spaces, and it's also interesting to see. They feel like the most European places in North America because they are often the oldest places and the places that kind of have that history to them. So Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
But again, so many of them are now not used as train stations. So I went to Savannah, Georgia, for a
Mhm,
weekend by train, and um, traveled by Amtrak from Washington D.C. to Savannah, Georgia, and the train station is like 2 miles out of town, and it's again like a 1950s square box that you have to catch a cab into Savannah proper because they closed the actual rail station down years ago, and it's losing so many of the really gorgeous train stations or having them changed
mhm,
into other things. Like many of them have changed into other things, which is great, but we only have, I think, a handful of the glorious ones
mhm,
left, and I really hope we get to keep them, um, and preserve them. And I really like what they have done with places like Union Station,
mhm,
in Washington D.C., where they have preserved it, and now it's kind of a multi-purpose space. So it's I used to go there to watch movies. There was a movie theater in the basement, so
nice.
I'd go there on Friday nights to see movies, and in addition to catching the metro there on a regular basis, because it was the movie theater that was closest to my house.
Mhm,
So there are things you could do with these beautiful big spaces that can preserve them and keep them and make them come alive. Because I think the joy of a train station is that it does feel alive because there's always something
mhm.
going on in them. Yeah.
Yeah, there's one in central Vancouver, and I can't remember what it's called, but there used to be 2 big stations, it used to be one of them, but they have turned it into, like, the hub station for the SkyTrain and a different commuter train, and so they've redone it, but it's still got some of the old bits, and you're like, "Oh, you're actually honoring the spirit of what this building was for, but also making it a wonderful and useful place, and making it a really hub sort of." Because I was there with my parents, and my mom was like, "I remember catching a train from not this station and not," and then we worked it out that, sometime in the 1960s or whatever, she'd caught a train from what is now, like, the hub of the SkyTrain, which is great that that's still being used for that. Um, I guess my last question, which you may have already answered, well, one of my last questions is, what's your favorite form of public transport?
Yeah, it's trains. Trains. Sorry, trains. Um, I take buses. I have taken buses. Especially in the United States, I will take buses because they are often a more cost-effective form of transport. Especially between New York and Philadelphia and Washington D.C. Um, there are many competitive bus companies, and I have taken I had 2 cats when I was living there, so when I would go visit my family in Philadelphia from New York or DC, I would take my 2 cats on, the buses that would allow animals, um, because there were some bus companies where you could just take pretty much anything, so I would just hop on 2 cats in my lap, and,
Was this on, like, a Greyhound or equivalent?
it was not on a Greyhound. It was not on a Greyhound. It was on one of the low price buses that you can get,
Yeah.
running, um, yeah, from New York to Philadelphia or from DC to Philadelphia. So it would be like $15 for a trip, and you could bring anything on as long as you could pretty much fit it with you. So I I don't even think I asked. I think I just like rocked up with 2
Yeah.
cats, bought a ticket, put them in my lap, just sat there. My cats just sat there. Nobody said anything.
Yeah.
And yeah,
A coach journey is always a wild, that anything goes on a coach journey.
yeah. And
Um,
I couldn't have done that on Amtrak. Yes.
yeah, yeah, I can imagine they're a bit stricter on those things. Don't worry, you don't have to justify not loving buses as much as trains. That's perfectly all right. I understand that. It's not I mean, I don't know if I'd say I like trains or buses better. I just kind of like them both. Actually, I'd probably say my favorite is cable cars because I love a cable car. Um, But what is your thought on how public transport could be made better in this country, in Europe, any country, the whole world, America, wherever you want? It can
I
be
mean,
something silly too.
I know in the United States, we talk a lot about high speed rail, and it seems like such a pipe dream, like high speed rail. But I really do think it would make a difference. Um, the only problem is, I mean, hey, we're talking about pipe dreams. So yes, high speed rail,
Yes.
affordable, fast, frequent high speed rail is what I would like to see. And also more metro systems with more frequent service. Um, yeah, that's what I would like to see. Um,
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah, just make
definitely.
it easier to catch trains places
Yeah, I
or
mean,
trams or yeah.
Eastern and Western America, just they're so close together. They're so made to be high-speed rail between them. And it my frustration my whole life is Edmonton and Calgary are like a 3.5 hour drive apart. They're the only cities in that part of Canada that are close to one another. You could get a 90-minute train between the two if the oil lobby didn't object quite so hard. And they've been talking about it for my whole life. And sadly, it'd be great because I could go to Edmonton and visit friends in Calgary. Now, can't do that. Not enough time, but sadly, connect all of North America. Just high speed train them all together. That's what we want. We want Ticket to Ride real world. Um, where can people find you or anything you want to plug or share or your Eurovision stuff or all that?
Yes, I'll plug my Eurovision stuff because I often talk about my train stuff with Eurovision because I'll be like, "Hey, I'm on my way to go to Eurovisija, or I'm on my way to Esti Lau, or I'm on my way to some other national final." You can find me at dudepoints dot fun, or dudepois as it's correctly pronounced, dot fun. Um, that's my blog, dudepois.fun, and I'm also on X slash Twitter
Yeah, I'm
and
still
Blue
calling it
Sky.
Twitter firmly.
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter and Blue Sky as dudepois, um, as well, where I have insightful Eurovision, yeah,
I mean,
content.
I like Eurovision, but like I just watched the final kind of level. But I do think your stuff is insightful and I enjoy reading it, even if I don't understand the ins and outs of each country's specific entries.
Yeah.
But yes, thank you so much. It's been really lovely to talk to you and just talk about trains and traveling by trains, which is always fun and exciting.
Thank you, and I wanna say actually thank you because it's nice to see 2 women talking about trains, because I don't think that I think it's a very, male-dominated space, which is
Yeah.
fine, like, that's great, but I also women like trains too.
Yeah.
Non-binary people like trains too, and, I don't think necessarily their voices are heard quite as much, so thank you for being one of those voices.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I think it is a space that I think more people need to take up. And I think it is diversifying. I think I love the fact that if you go to an exciting train event, there are people of all different genders and backgrounds and races and all those sorts of things. And I'm like, this is really great. And particularly younger people, I think that is changing. And I mean, there are lots of great people of all age groups in enthusiasm, but I remember when I first got into things and people would be like, "You don't know what you're talking about," and it's some, like, 80-year-old man, and I'm like, "Of course I don't know what I'm talking about. I just wanted to come to this event because it was interesting," and I do think there's more space for that, and that's kind of what I wanna do is just talk and be excited about it and just be like, "Everybody can love trains," and we're really positive about that. So yes, thank you so much, and thanks for loving trains as well.
Yay, love trains, ride trains, don't gatekeep. Woo.
Woo. Alright. That was really wonderful. It was so great to get to chat with Anne about differences in transport around the world and traveling around for Eurovision. Um, it made me, I mean, I've taken a lot of trains in Europe, but it made me want to take even more trains in Europe. Thank you so much, Anne, and thank you to you for listening and or watching. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe, rate, review, tell your friends, all those good things. You can find me, Emily Turner, at ET Right Home on Twitter, and also you can find me at Emily Takes the Bus on Instagram and on TikTok. That's the word I'm looking for. Instagram and TikTok. My other podcast is Round Around We Go. We've just put out an update in the not too distant past, and we're hopefully going to have some more episodes soon. But thank you for watching, and see you in a fortnight.